because of feeling of helplessness is what power do I have as an individual to affect these things going on around me when I feel so small.
Sermons in the feed. Every fear became a market. Every wound became a need. Terms and promises and pixels shaped the hearts we couldn't see. Corporations played the parent, no soul, no love, no memory. And the ones who sold the answers only wanted to count the click. Hid our pains in bright distraction, fed us fast and made us sick. Is this the lost generation, raised by signals in the dark? Technology played the parent.
Welcome back, everybody. Another episode of Emotional Algebra with me, Dr. E. You're hearing a song fading out that I created again in honor of this episode. And it's a pretty strong song. You know, it's one that when I created it moved me a lot. And it just, the irony to keep in mind is that it's almost like AI is telling on itself because it really captured the essence of what's going on with our kids today. And what's going on with us and our families. So I am welcoming in again your friend, my friend, our friend, Tara Lombardo.
What's up, Eric?
Yo, what's up?
What's up? I'm excited about today. This is a topic that I feel like every parent out there struggles with the phones, the iPads, the distractions, the earbuds, the whole bit. So I'm excited about this.
We're an interesting topic today. We are going to dive into what's going on with this generation of millennials, Gen Zers, Gen Alphas, and how all this technology has affected them and why these trends are in place and what we can do about it and what we can look to toward the future with this and what they're bringing to us.
Yeah. Any guidance you have, I'm taking in. And I feel like everybody watching, listening is going to be like, okay, I'm all in because there's no book for this. Like I always say, if you figure out how to manage social media, tell me, because it's something that is constantly evolving and a constant struggle, I think, for many, many, many parents. At least it has been for me. And I feel like I'm a very good parent. And this has been the most challenging issue I have had, hands down, with both of my kids.
Yeah. And it can bring up conflict so quickly that can escalate so quickly, in part because of the immersion they've had in it and how it's affected impulse control and coping and how they understand emotions versus how to interact. And, so all these things we're going to touch on through this. So let's go ahead and dive on in and see where this takes us. So again, thank you to Notebook LM for this for helping develop this presentation here. But here we have growing pains in a digital age, guiding Gen Z and Alpha, navigating the permacrisis, closing the soft skills gap, and raising resilient kids in a screen-mediated world. So remember, if you're listening, I'd love for you to come back and watch it. And if you're watching, you'll know why I'm reading things through and explaining things a little more. And especially if you're watching on a small phone, some of these graphics might be hard to read yourself. So I'll be explaining a lot. So what we're looking at is, in starting this, is the idea of this great shift of what happened to childhood. So really, we're going back to millennials. We're going back to, now it's 16 years or more, really. To looking at what happened. So first we had the millennials. They call them the digital pioneers. They were really introduced to more of this immersion into these digital fields. We've had handheld video games for a while. Those were one issue. But then once we got into more of the online interaction, kids at young ages being given screens at very early ages or being put in front of I remember years ago, Terry, and you might too, remember you drive behind most of the minivans and SUVs and you see the light of the video screen in there.
The DVD player that popped down. Yes.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, that was where in many ways that became the first babysitter. And even just putting kids at home in front of the TVs in ways it became the babysitter. And not, just wanting our kids to be entertained. We'd put them in front. And, I remember when I was little, it was Sesame Street that I'd watch. And a lot of parents put their kids in front of some educational programs. And then also they would put them in front of some things that weren't so educational, not necessarily understanding brain development at early ages, and really being wise about those first 2 years of not having that exposure is something I've always talked about. Is my daughter never saw a screen until after 2 years old. And even then it was moderated in how she was exposed to it and things. And I remember recently having some friends over who had a 1-year-old, and they just gave her the phone to watch. And I did mention some of them because I just felt it's not that they had any intention just to have her babysitter. They just thought, well, this is something that's just occupying her time,
It's so hard. It's so hard because I remember my daughter was 18 months old maybe, and she took my phone and I got it back and I was like, why is it in Mandarin? She changed my phone setting. And this was Ariel, my youngest. Like, she changed my phone setting. And I was like, well, I didn't even know how to get it back. And her little fingers, took the phone, and she knew exactly what she was doing. And that always stuck with me as like this core memory that at 18 months old, she understood how to work the phone. So, so I failed obviously in that part where, no, my kids definitely saw a screen before they were 2 years old. It was not a babysitter per se, but I mean, they definitely saw a screen for sure. Yeah. It's so hard.
Yeah, it is. And there's sometimes it's tough balances, especially when you have, most families are 2 working parents, and they're coming home and they have dinner to make and things to do. And the kid wants their time, and they're like, well, let me go ahead and distract you over here while I get dinner made. And then we're going to have our hour of time together, and we're going to read your books to go to bed and all those things. And we live in still our world is go, 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 go.
Yeah. And I do think it's important to set up parameters before we get started here, because I think, my children are fine. They're fine. They turned out great. You know what I mean? And I do think how much of this that you're presenting should parents look at as a guideline versus do this or it's going to be so detrimental to your children. Can you make sure that as we're going through this, that it's like you really point out, like, this is a biggie? Because I think all in all, this is very difficult to follow to a T because of everything you just said. This is hard.
Yeah. And even with all the structure we put in place for Grace, it was in her teenage years when all that stuff happened in middle school years, and then her wanting to connect with friends that then were a lot of her current struggles. She acknowledges that really came from that. So yes, you can do everything to set everything up, your child, set them up for success. And then life happens outside of the home. And that's what we're really going to talk about, is the life that happens outside of your purview or outside of the home, or, and things just happen, that it's how you manage that afterwards. And we'll definitely get into that later. So continuing back, we have the Generation Z, where as they say, the digital adapters. I thought this phrase was in the first to experience the screenager adolescence, which again, very apropos description of that. And we have Generation Alpha, which were AI and, as they say, streaming natives. So born from 2010 to 2024, knowing no world without a black box, algorithms, and tablets. So they were definitely in front of a lot of the social media, immersed in it, saw their parents immersed likely in many ways in the social media. And that was just the model, that then, and none of us, how could so many really have predicted the outcomes in those times? That's why, as parents, we do the best we can with what we know.
Absolutely.
And even when I talk to my daughter and say, hey, could we have done anything different? She goes, no, you did the best you could with what you knew at the time,
What an amazing compliment. Like, an amazing compliment.
Yeah.
That's good, Eric. That's good.
Well, she knew we tried. She knows your intentions. If your kids know your intentions, that your intentions are good, that your intentions come from a place of love, that mitigates so much. And it helps to often, you might not see the outcomes immediately, but as they continue to grow older and mature and they see that and they realize that there might be years that are absolute hell that you have, especially going through some of these screen issues that we're talking about in social media and creating those breaks in times. There's a balance there between letting them trip and fall and feel failure and experience that feeling of failure, and also having those boundaries that, like, I have to create structure here, and that's a tough thing. So here's the one of the important things that happened is this talks about the canary in the coal mine, this, and says the Gen Z precedent. So what happened to kids and young adults' ability to cope over this exposure and immersion into computers and screens? Well, before in life, you'd have an obstacle. And when you'd have stress rise, you'd use some type of coping skill or coping mechanism that you likely would have learned by engaging in society, engaging with other people. You then incorporate that coping skill, and then you'd resolve the stress. So you find a solution, and then stress resolves. So now what's currently happening is now you have Gen Z and Gen Alpha. They have this obstacle. Their stress rises. And what do? They drive into distraction. They get immersed into, they scroll their TikToks or Instagrams or all the things that they're accustomed to doing now. And that's what they feel their coping mechanism is an escape. That doesn't teach them anything other than to escape.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that we, do talk to our Grace about, have over the years, saying when you feel overwhelmed, if all you do is immerse yourself into this technology, how are you going to learn to engage in relationships? How are you going to learn conflict resolution? How are you going to learn to soothe your own emotions? Because you're counting on technology to soothe your emotion. You're counting on that dopamine high to soothe your emotion. So, we look at this idea of at 2012, when smartphones were really adopted, we see sharp, unprecedented rises in teen depression, anxiety, and loneliness. And remember, my view of depression, the core emotion is hopelessness. The core emotion of anxiety is helplessness. And loneliness is one of those keys that happens when I feel isolated and alone and I feel lonely. That often comes with worthlessness and overwhelm, and we haven't really learned how to cope. So we sit in that feeling. And even a lot of adults are in that same place now because they've regressed in many ways with their exposure to social media and online content stuff. So I remember seeing what was it? The other day I saw a man and a woman, both separate Instagram accounts, but just doing all these things young adults were doing, like dancing and doing, and I was like, and I just went, is this for real? Because you could see that thirst for, just wanting attention and wanting clicks. And, again, so this is really about more than just these generations, whereas we want to make sure that we help these generations adapt and grow up to be more healthy and look at the things so we can understand them rather than judge them. And we can understand what each of us and many parents are going through rather than judge those parents,
And I think it's important that most people know right now that, yes, we know the algorithm now. Like, we know that this was built to be addictive. We didn't really know that until these, great documentaries like The Social Experiment came out, and you had the founder of Instagram and Facebook coming out saying, oh, yes, absolutely. We designed these to keep you on that endless scroll, like over and over and over again. So, like, we now know that. So it's not like, hey, we're pointing a finger at you as the parent. What are your kids doing? We're all, quote unquote, victims of this ourselves and doing the very best that we can as well, because you are literally inviting yourself into an algorithm that is designed to keep you there. So that's always hard for me. Like, I'll find sometimes, like, oh my gosh, I'm upset about my kid being on the phone. And have I been doom scrolling for 45 minutes to 2 hours. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
we've all had that time lapse where it's
Mhm.
like, it's not noon. Like there's no way I've been on this phone for 3 hours. You know what I mean? Like we've all
Yeah.
had that time lapse because
Yeah.
we're designed to do that. So I do think that's a really important point to show, like, you have to model the behavior, but at the same time, you're both in this addictive machine that is
Mhm.
literally created to keep you on there. Gen Xers have the advantage that we had life before this.
Mhm.
So it's like we developed before this, and this is literally their reality. And I think
Mhm.
that's a really hard thing to get by. Like you just said, well, you just want attention. We can see that. Like we have a different vantage point where I think
Mhm.
Gen Zers and of course Gen Alpha, because they're so young, but even some millennials, it's like they grew up with it. So they don't see what's fake and what's reality. They don't understand like that's
Yeah.
fake. They're
Yeah.
doing that
Yeah.
for attention. So
Yeah.
then you as the parent have to tell them when you see something like that, that's not real. That's not truthful. They're doing that for attention, or that's a cry for help, or,
Yeah.
it becomes very tricky.
And then understand that they're kind of looking at you as just judging. You're just old and
Yes.
you're judging. You don't, it's so because yeah, it's remember. So we're going back to our Sonder episode that we want to remember that, yeah, we have our observations and we also want to make sure that we're observing from where their perspective is. Because there were so many times I recognized, even with Grace, that I was just judging and doing this, really diving into this episode, knowing these things more now, but then doing the research for this episode, I was like, yeah. And I knew, I knew so many kids have their struggle. I work with a lot of kids these days in my office and young adults who have grown up in these same experiences. And it's a struggle because you just can't tell somebody snap out of it, get a job, get up out of bed. It's unless you've been in that space and also understanding that dopamine addiction
Yeah.
and somebody just literally feeling like I got to get up and scroll to even think about getting out of bed.
Yeah.
It's almost like getting up and, taking a swig of the bottle.
It is. I mean, you say get up, get a job, do that. Put the phone down.
Yeah.
Like that's the biggest thing. Like put the phone down. And for a lot of people, they hold it all day long. I'm sitting here reaching for it. It's
Yeah.
right in front of me. And I think that's how now it's our wallet, it's our camera, it's so many things. So, it's right by our side at all times. And I think just that simple, put the phone down. I have to now make time and strategically think, I'm going to put my phone in the other room. I'm not going to have my phone while I'm eating. I'm not going to have because
Right.
it becomes too much. Like I start looking at my screen average, when they send that on Sundays, I'm like, oh, can I opt out of that? Can you stop?
That's how I want to start my Sunday off. You've been on your phone for 13 hours a day.
How do I opt out? I don't want to see it, but it's actually really nice because it'll tell me if it's up or it's down. And it's a good reminder for me to be like, okay, so if I spent 5 hours a day on my phone and there's 7 days out of the week, it's like, how many years of my life am I going to be on this phone? The math gets scary.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, so what we want to go back to is look at the effect of all this screen interaction. And it did slow down the development of a lot of these kids and young adults, is that their development to driving, we in Atlanta often look at kids who didn't want to drive as, well, the roads are really busy out here and there's so much traffic. And when you look at that though, when you look at the trends and you look around now, more data collected around the country as well as other areas likely in the world, as you see this slow adoption of more mature behaviors. So many of us couldn't wait to get in a car and drive, and so many kids are wanting to wait till they're 18 or later just not drive. So what is the effect of not interacting in the real world? Is then often the secondary effects of that is then the things that we want to do to assume responsibility. Because I never learned to cope, I don't want to get myself into situations where I have more adult responsibilities because it looks too hard. I feel overwhelmed and I feel buried in that. So, and then I think another key part that it talked about here is, with driving, dating, working part-time jobs were slowed down, but also I know so many kids who have self-diagnosed, yet they don't really understand what they can do. It's like almost that learned helplessness. Well, this is my diagnosis. And I always am very careful to say, you are not your diagnosis. There are emotions that led to this circumstance. There are other situations that led to the circumstance. And as long as people feel like they are a prisoner to their own diagnosis, whether, it's depression or bipolar or anxiety or post-traumatic stress, I think, and that's what I want to encourage people to do overall, is look and understand the emotions that have gone into it, the life experiences that have fed the symptoms. Because if you diagnose yourself and you live in that diagnosis rather than understanding what got you there, then yes, that will define you. And that's what we want to help to change, is the way people define themselves, in the world, and what they can do. To really have some sense of agency, has some sense of power. So what Gen Alpha's inherited world, what happened is they were born into what they call the permacrisis. They're always looking at what's going on, going back to, as we're looking at the pandemic. And then they've seen a lot of geopolitical conflict. They've seen political conflict. They've seen community issues. They've seen all these people yelling and screaming at each other. We didn't grow up with that level, that lack of mutual respect and decorum.
Yeah.
It was, so this is something that kids are just being immersed in that. And how does that affect their emotions? How does it affect their coping mechanisms? What they can turn on and see in all these things they see, again, flipping through social media to see these people who, the louder I am, the more outrageous I look, the more that I can humiliate or try to humiliate people, shame them, guilt them. Who would want to be out there in that unless I'm controlling it, So that's a tough situation. And then again, that lack of socialization early in life because of limitations in our interactions with human people during the pandemic. And then, like I said, a lot of those virtual interactions they were having online just to feel like they could fit in with their friends left them from really engaging with people in those social interactions so it delayed social and emotional development and compounding reliance on screens. Because either that's the only way I can connect with my friends, because nobody wants to go out and do much or play much anymore like we used to, because I can do things on my screen, or I feel that social anxiety because I'm not used to going out in places. So fear says, don't do something that could evoke pain, so avoid that situation. And then helplessness comes up and says, I need help to do this, but I don't want to ask for help because I don't want to look weak, which then increases that anxiety, which then what happens? Leads to more feelings of depression or hopelessness, which then leads to feelings of depression because I feel hopeless to resolve it because I didn't get some of the help I felt I needed, and I didn't want to ask for it because I don't want to look weak, because our culture is now all about looking strong and powerful and all those things. So that's kind of...
COVID was like a double down of the digital generation, and out of everything wonderful that came out of COVID, like a lot of people are working from home and they realized, oh, people can be productive. A lot of downsizing of an actual brick and mortar footprint. There was, some actual, there were some really good things that came out of COVID. But this in particular, I was shocked when all of this type of data started coming out afterwards. We didn't realize the unbelievable effects that it had on our children with their schooling, with their developmental years. It's really alarming. And it's nice to see that those who are a little bit older, who were in, the middle school, high school age, it appears that a lot of that is self-correcting. But the developmental years, I mean, that's huge. I can't imagine not being able to go out on a play date. And, the parents were probably pulling their hair out. Having you look forward to those play dates. Like that was when there was a lot of release of energy. And to know that all of that was pent up, that energy has to go somewhere. So to your point, it's a lack of development, which is very
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah, and I think in that we want to remember, and like you were saying, Tara, it's not that this generation's broken.
No.
It's that they have their work to do. We all have our work to do. We like, what came with different generations were different stressors. For me and born in the 60s, it was still that fear of nuclear war to some degree,
Mhm.
and then we had a larger period of peace where that wasn't so much the issue, but that kind of set some of the stage for people who didn't feel like they knew what could happen at any moment. And now here it's just magnified so much more, that we have all these looming global threats. We have cyber threats. We have it's just so many things, but it really affects a sense of anxiety because of feeling of helplessness. Is what power do I have as an individual to affect these things going on around me when I feel so small and I feel so significant? So again, going back to our idea of Sonder, if we could Sonderfy or Sonderize, this generation, help them to see that we live in a world of 8 billion other people who feel pretty similar, and that together we can affect change. I think that's an important thing to look at here. So what happens with all this infinite content is our attention spans are really dwindle. We say that what Twitter was 140 characters, they increased it, but that whole thing of our kids' attention span, ADD alone, if people do have attention deficit disorders, their attention span is compromised. Now, when you add in just that digital exposure and having trained the brain from very early ages for short content and a lot of visual, moving, fast moving content, as well as changing topics and subjects, you're not training people cognitively for sustained attention. So it's had to change the way we teach. Whereas I still have concerns for what is this next generation going to do for problems that take sustained attention, involvement, gathering a number of pieces of data together at the same time and combining them to really form solid solutions. AI is doing that now, whereas our brains really need to understand that and do that and build those skills. So that's an important piece here. So then what we started to see was dropping test scores in reading and math skills below the national average. So our kids, are they not as achievement skill based? So what we want to identify, the difference here is the difference between intelligence, which is all about potential. So that's what you have the capability to do, and achievement, which is what you have learned and can apply to learning in the present. So we have a lot of kids and young adults with potential who haven't lived up to it. So then what we see is a compromising of what their expectations are even for themselves. Well, I did this today. And, and for them, they're like, I did this, so their level of potential measurement of their own personal achievements might be lower. And for them, we got to remember, again, Sonder, look at the world they grew up and look at their own sense of overwhelm. So when you feel overwhelmed, if you're walking around with a broken leg and you put the some weight on your leg and walk down that leg for 5 minutes while it's healing, and you got to keep doing that, you're like, hey, I walked on my leg for a few minutes. But we don't look at our kids that way. We look at them, I used to do that. I used to walk uphill 2 ways with 2 broken legs when I was your age, kind of thing like that. So we just want to understand and appreciate what our kids are growing up with, what they've been experiencing, what these young adults have experienced, to help them to rehab and then to strengthen those legs they're walking on, so to speak, in that. So then we have, again, subjective truth. And this to me is so critical, is the idea of being saturated by conflicting information. They want truth. They want authenticity around them. What do they trust? They don't trust the corporations. They often don't trust even some of the people around them. They don't trust what they're being taught in school. They don't trust their politicians. So that leads to a lot of mistrust. Again, fear-based emotions, then avoidant behavior. And we're seeing that because they also really haven't identified what is right versus wrong, they're going to follow their feelings. And one of my roles that I do, and I know you take the same approach, Tara, is learning how to discern in life. And discerning comes from a true understanding of emotions and how emotions are affecting our perceptions of self and the world, and then how our gut feels. And our gut has often been confused and filtered through emotions. Then our emotions become really the determiner for what we perceive as the good or strong or right thing to do versus what we've seen and what just truly feels right. So that's where you have a lot of people reacting instead of responding and looking for, well, this is what this came from. And that's why, again, we're talking about emotional algebra, the beliefs, the attitudes, the perceptions, all the equations that go into why we make the choices we make. And I can't tell you how often I'm talking to people about that idea of, let's understand how we help you to discern, and know that in the process of learning to discern, you're going to continue to make mistakes because failure tells you when it's time to learn. Yeah.
And I think a good rule of thumb that I do for my kids is I always want to know the why behind everything. Like, it's the former journalist in me, like why?
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody is putting content up online, okay, well, why are they putting it there? Is it to sell clothes? Is it to sell an item? Is it to sell their opinion? Most of the time they're looking to sell something. So if you can help your kids identify what is the why behind what this person is doing, is it clicks? Is it to get attention? Is it to sell something? Is it to divide? Is it to influence public opinion? That type of discernment and teaching your children at a very young age, why is this content out there? Is it strictly to entertain? And if it is strictly to entertain, well, then, okay, enjoy it and then be done with it. But if it's not and it has a specific purpose, helping them identify what that purpose is gives them more control and allows them to ingest that material in their own personal way. So they're not just sitting back and being fed content after content. And it really does put them in the driver's seat a little bit more. And I know we spoke about this previously, that there's so much false content out there that you really do have to be very careful and teach your children how to vet something properly. You know, where did that come from? Because they're getting bombarded. It's too much for a brain, especially a developing brain, to take in.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and again, that goes back to that thing about, you know, really that slide title for the previous one, the canaries in the coal mine. You know, they're letting us know that there's problems. And that's what I'm often helping parents to see when their kids are having problems within the family. I'll thank the kid, say, thank you. Thank you for what? For having the courage to show that there's a problem. You know, so these kids are definitely, you know, definitely doing. And I think one thing we want to help our kids to understand are psychological processes like the confirmation bias. Because I think there are a lot of people who read, especially young adults, I'm seeing that they're reading things that are just confirming. And we've talked about that in social media, just with adults in general, but making sure your kids understand, be careful what you read, that you dismiss what doesn't fit and you only attach onto what does fit. Because you know, there are a lot of people who are looking at AI and AI causes this and does that. I'm like, okay, and, you know, and so that's where I always want there to be an and instead of period, you know?
Well, exactly. And it's understanding who's feeding AI. So there's bias there too. So you always have to understand that you, the parent, are the end all be all to help decipher what your child should be ingesting, how they ingest it, how they process it. Talk to them.
Hey viewers, our episode ran a little long, so we decided to split into 2 episodes. So stay tuned for the next episode to pick up where we left off. And until next time.
Status image more and more. Kids were learning trust from voices that had never known true love before. Now they're young and still uncertain, borrowed words on borrowed breath, looking up to empty prophets, selling guidance without truth or depth. Every trend becomes a compass, every comment draws a line, and they ask the nameless crowds to see them, forgetting their souls were